Alrighty, Paul has just cast a spirit of divination out of a little slave girl who was being exploited for her supernatural abilities to some degree. Either foretell future. Of course, divination doesn't have to be just foretelling. It can be forthtelling, that is, knowing things that could not be known otherwise other than by some supernatural means. And so divination could be used, and sometimes is used, to discover stuff that couldn't otherwise be discovered. Oh, your long-lost aunt whom you haven't seen for 4 years is living in Toledo, and if you'll go to this address, you'll find her. That's in the category of divination. And so this little girl had that ability to tell people things that could only be known supernaturally, and they'd pay for the privilege to meet with her and ask those questions, and the Spirit would answer, and there was enough legitimacy to it that it made a business for the two guys that were carting her around. So when she was delivered of this demon, when this demon came out, and we're going to assume that there was some kind of a visible sign the demon came out, oftentimes with Christ read about, gagging and some degree of violence there. And the demon came out at that moment. So we begin reading now in verse number 19 of Acts 16. But when her masters saw that their hope of profit was gone, so they recognized, wow, she's changed. They seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. And just think about this. Here's these guys who are exploiting a little girl, and now this little girl is delivered. She's free from being demon-possessed. And what are they doing about it? They're dragging the guys who delivered her to the authorities because they've ruined our business of exploiting this little girl. What a perversion. What a sick, sick perversion. And it's so representative of so much that takes place under the banner of business. When money becomes your God, this is the kind of stuff that results. But we see lesser forms of this in the business world all the time, because if God's your God, then you're going to treat others like you want to be treated. And so business becomes a fair deal, a loving thing to love your neighbor as yourself, and you result with win-win situations, not win-lose situations. So when they had brought them to the chief magistrates, they said, "These men are throwing our city into confusion, being Jews, and are proclaiming customs which it is not lawful for us to accept or to observe, being Romans." Now you see, they didn't even complain about what they were really upset about. They just put up a smoke screen. They're really upset because a little girl has been delivered from a demon and they can't line their pockets anymore, exploiting her. And so they would never, of course, bring that up as a crime, because that would be a miracle that would get the attention of everybody, and that wouldn't serve their purposes. And so they're just focusing on something else, just trying to get these guys in trouble. Verse 22, the crowd rose up together against them. Crowds are stupid. And the chief magistrates tore their robes off them and proceeded to order them to be beaten with rods. Magistrates are stupid sometimes, following along with the crowd rather than administrating justice and giving these guys a fair trial. They're just going to go by the testimony of a couple of people and a mob who are all riled up and beat two Jews who have come into their city with rods. Verse number 23, when they had struck them with many blows. Now, let's stop there for a second. I wonder if, as Paul and Silas I'm imagining them being strapped to a beam or something, and a guy behind him whacking him with a rod, whacking their backs, or who knows, maybe beating them all over their bodies, asking themselves, are we in the will of God here? Did God really lead us here? And they can fall back on the night vision that the Apostle Paul had when they were still over in Asia Minor and say, yes, God knew this was going to happen, and we're certain we're right in the middle of his will, and so we can keep on rejoicing. And we're going to read the story of exactly how they did that. Struck them with many blows, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to guard them securely. And he, having received such a command, threw them into the inner prison, so not just any prison, but we're going to secure them, and fastened their feet in stocks. So there you have it. It's not a nice picture. And remember, the prison that they were put in Philippi would be of no comparison to the prisons, modern day prisons in the developed world. No, these were like dungeons. And this was no fun. Damp, cold, harsh, feet in stocks, and beaten and bruised and perhaps bloodied because of the treatment they had received. And it's so surprising then to read the very next verse because it stands as such a contrast to what we have just been reading. But let this inspire you. Verse 25, but about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns of praise to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And so, at midnight, how much worse can it get? It's dark in the prison in Philippi. And feet are in stocks, beaten, bloodied, you don't know what's going to happen to you next. And what are they doing? They're praising God. Why? A couple of reasons. Praising God because we know we're in the center of His will and God has not abandoned us. He knew this was going to happen before we ever got here. And secondly, as we saw when the apostles one time were flogged, they were rejoicing because they were counted worthy to suffer for Christ's sake. And you only have to think about that and then experience it before it become really the reality to you that it was to them, to suffer for the sake of Christ. Now, here's what concerns me. These guys were happy, thrilled to be able to show their love for Jesus by suffering extraordinarily. Yet we have so many modern-day professing Christians who are unwilling to suffer in the least by even inconveniencing themselves to obey the general will of God that's been revealed in His Word for everybody. Wow. Something to think about as we stop here. I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.